Thanks, Adam. So thanks, Adam, for that introduction. Just to go through a little bit about myself, I've worked at one of the UK's largest hauliers for the last 9 years. My role there was managing the staff training team, so that incorporated MHE training as a whole for that whole company. We had 6 MHE instructors based around the UK, and we delivered that training in-house, and it was my role to manage the rollout of that and the ongoing development of it. Recently joined AITT last month and thoroughly looking forward to getting started and working with Adam and the team. So a little bit about what we're going to go through today then. So in this short session, we're going to look through the workplace transport groupings, the history and the categories around that. We're going to look into certification, so in-house versus accredited. We're also going to look at how we check certificates, show you an example of a good certificate of what it should look like, and what you can do back in your workplace, or how you can check them certificates as well. We're going to look at challenging certificates. So if you do have any concerns or you feel like there's any issues with certificates themselves, how you would go about challenging them with the relevant maybe job recruitment agency, for example. And the final part is going to be training requirements. So is there a requirement for training? And also if there is, for example, conversion training, how we would go about doing that. So into the first slide then. The HSE definition, so there needs to be a significant difference in how MHE is controlled and the environment in which it operates in. So under the pure regs, all employers must ensure that all persons who use work equipment receive adequate training. So what we're going to look at through the next few slides is why, if they're saying we need adequate training, how we go about that and looking at the different categories. So this leads us in nicely to the ABA category code. So initially, they were recognised by the accrediting bodies adopting the BITA codes as a way to categorise different truck types. More recently, in 2012, the ABA was formed as the governance to the uniform testing standards of these categories. So the current ABA category list now has 52 different categories of equipment. And if I link back to my previous slide, the list I'm going to show you below now is this makes the machines significantly different. And that is the reason why training would be required. So we can see there in the category in the list, categories can change by lifting capacity, lifting height, and that makes them significantly different and explains the reason why we would need to provide additional training to our staff members and teams and things. Over the next few slides, we're going to look at some different categories. We've pinpointed some to talk through. It's not a conclusive list. We've just highlighted some of the trucks we're going to talk through. So the first category we're going to go through is the A category. So we've picked 3 different trucks out here. We've got A1, A2 and A5. So you can see 3 different trucks. So the A1 is pedestrian operated, A2 is rider operated, and A5 is where the stacking element comes into it as well. 3 different trucks with 3 significant differences, all within one category. So this shows the importance of why we would need to provide further training. It's not a case of if you've got an A1 certificate of basic training, you can then go and operate an A5. There is different elements to that training, and we would need to provide further training in the forms of a conversion course, for example, which is something we will look at later on in the session. Another category we're going to look at is the counterbalance category, so the B category. Again, 3 different ones we've pinpointed here, B1, B2 and B3. The significant difference here is the lifting capacity, and a common question I was asked in my previous role was, if my candidate or my staff member has a B3 certificate, can they operate B1 and B2? And the simple answer is no, you can't. You need further training to operate them trucks, those different categories of trucks. And the reason is because there is a significant difference in the lifting capacity and the environment that they work in, which would determine further training. So a B1, for example, is potentially going to be picking up a wide variety of different types of loads and pallets you'd find in a standard warehouse. And B3 may be more spec'd for purpose and pick up very similar items like steel ingots and things, obviously of a heavy weight. So the lifting capacity and the working environment is the significant difference here, and shows the reason why we would need further training. So another category we're going to look at is the D category, which is your reach trucks. Again, we've picked 2 out here, D1 and D2. operate in very similar ways, but the difference here is the lift height. Again, a common question that always be asked is, we'd have agency assessments coming in and candidates would have a D1 certificate, and the trucks you may operate are D2, so over 8,001 millimeters. Can they operate a D2? Again, no, you need to provide further training. And the reason is because you're lifting to a greater height. So we wouldn't want to say to a candidate who may have only operated up to 7,000 mil or something, you're now going to lift to top level, which is a lot higher, and they may be nervous and scared and things for that extra height. So you would need to provide further training. Next category we're going to look at is the E category. Important reason why we've put this one in is it has recently changed. So E1 used to be up to 2,500 millimeters, and it has now been changed to 3,000. Again, a similar theme with the reach category. The significant difference here is the lift height. So you can see that the E2 lifts up, goes to it's a greater lift on that one. Next one we're going to look at is the VNA, or the very narrow aisle. So the F category, we've got two here we're looking at, F1 and an F2. So F1 is your VNA, where the operator will go up in the air with the truck. So again, heights and things come into that, especially within the training. And an F2 would be where the operator stays on the ground with the truck. So operate in similar ways, but obviously the significant difference here is the operator position. And again, we would need to ensure that further training is provided to ensure that that candidate feels comfortable with the heights they're going to be operating at and that type of thing. So it's a really important part why you would need to provide further training for that. The last couple of categories we're going to look at before we go through certificate checking is going to be H and Z. So I focus on the Z category here because a lot of the time I used to be asked the question, do we really need to provide training for a pallet truck? And it was, yeah, you do. As we said, linking back to the previous slides, under the pure regulations, it's still classed as working equipment. So you do need to provide training on that, on a pallet truck, whether or not companies deliver that in-house or accredited through AITT, for example. It is needed. It is workplace equipment, and yeah, you would need to provide it. The same with the H category. There's three different elements to that and different categories, and to operate them different trucks, you would need training for them. So certification. So in-house versus accredited then. What's the employer perspective? So in-house certificates aren't verified, correct? Like if you're delivering the training in-house, you're not registering it with an accrediting body like AITT, for example. There's no way you can monitor that or verify it with an accrediting body. It would all be dealt with in-house. Not to be taken from one employer to another. So you'd often hear, my certificate is in-house, I can't take that to my new company, for example, a common phrase you might hear. But flipping this on the other side, there is a positive. It can be a good solution to companies, and it does work for many companies, but you need to ensure that it is managed correctly. I know that in my previous role, managing that for one of the UK's largest hauliers, it's a good job, stressful at times and things, but it needs to be managed correctly, especially when you've got maybe up to 2,000 operators around the country. You need to ensure that their certificates are valid and the paperwork you're using is correct and accurate and stuff. So yeah, it can work definitely, but it needs to be managed correctly. How do you check certification then? So if you're in a position of having to check or review external certificates for new starters, for example, there are a few relevant items that you need to check that should be on your certificate. So if you're in that position where you're dealing with agency assessments coming in or that type of thing, and you need to check that the candidate has the right type of certificate, what actually are you looking for? So check if the training company is accredited. So you can see on this certificate here as an example, you can check the company is accredited with AITT as the example. Look for the ABA code. So as we've just been mentioning in the previous slides, if you know you're recruiting for a D2 reach truck, for example, you look at the certificate and it will tell you what category that candidate has received basic training in. If it's not D2, you know that further training is going to be needed. Check the certificate is accredited. So one of the 4 accrediting bodies, which we'll mention in a minute, make sure it is accredited and it's been done by by an accrediting body. You can check if the instructor is registered. If you have any doubt that that instructor isn't registered, you can check with the relevant accrediting body to make sure they are. Look for the accrediting body verification number. So with AITT, you've got ACORNS, NORS for RTITB, and ITSA has TOPS. So you can check that number with the accrediting body to make sure it is as it should be. And if you're ever unsure with a certificate, check with the relevant accrediting body. It's something that is so easy to do. And if you are unsure of that certificate or you've got any doubts whatsoever, that's what, if the training has been delivered to an accredited standard, you can check with that body. And that's the reason why we do it. Challenge certificates. So we've just seen an example of what a good certificate looks like, and you will get an access to that later, so you can refer back to it. If you have any doubts with a certificate, don't be afraid to challenge it. I know in my previous role, I did challenge certificates, and I would pester Adam and the team at AITT, asking them to check certificates for me, but it was what we wanted to make sure that we had candidates coming into an accredited standard. It's what it's there for. And I highly would recommend that if you're dealing with new starters and agency workers. The certificate demonstrates what basic training a candidate has had, so checking that is key, especially if you're going to be taking them on to work in your business. You might deal with recruitment agencies, which would send you a high volume of certificates to check. Sometimes a recruitment agency might not know the difference between these ABA categories. So a little golden nugget we'll leave you with at the end of today is access to the ABA categories with pictures, which will give you a really good foot in the door, really, to check what categories you've got on your site and what you should be looking for. So you can then refer back to an agency and say, look, we're looking for D2 reach truck operators, and they can put that on an advert, for example, and actually know what they're recruiting for. And internal certification as well. So if you are working for a company where you deliver in-house training at the moment, and you check your certificates and think, oh, we don't include the ABA code, the instructor doesn't put their registration number on there, challenge that and say, look, I need to be able to know what category of truck this candidate has been trained in. Can we put it on the certificate so I know that, right, Joe Bloggs has got a D2 qualification, and it just makes life that little bit easier for you. So training requirements then. How do we identify the need? That there is a need for training, so you can conduct a risk assessment. If you do operate different categories on your sites, ask yourself, do the staff members have the relevant training to operate safely? So if you know you're operating all three different types of counterbalance lift truck, do you have up-to-date refreshers for a B1, B2 and B3? You're not going down that route of, well, they've got a B3 so they can operate anything down below. Which we have heard in the past. It's making sure you've got that up to date. If you're planning to bring new equipment in, do your staff members require any further training? Again, previous experience, managers may bring in new pieces of equipment and then realize, oh, we don't have anyone signed off or trained to a basic training to operate that lift truck. So make sure you're pre-planning that. If you're bringing new equipment in, like if you're upgrading your reaches from a D1 to a D2, you are going to need further training. So you can pre-plan that, and it just helps get everything running smoothly as it should be. And if no to any of the above, operator training is required. Now, when I say operator training, I'm not saying that everyone here would need a lengthy novice course, for example. They may have already sat that. So if they've sat a novice course for a counterbalance B1, for example, and then you need them to operate a pivot steer truck, so a P1. Many trucks share similar features, but there will still be a significant difference between them. But it is possible that you can convert one skill to another, which is good because it is a shorter course. As it says, it removes the need for lengthy training courses, as shorter training conversion courses can be completed instead. So I'm just going to leave you with my final slide. So some supporting documentation. So the link that is provided there has got some great free content for you to download. So as I mentioned previously, you've got the ABA grouping list with pictures, which you can see an example of there. Great piece of information. If you take anything away, it will give you examples of what that truck is and the different categories it falls into. Especially if you're not familiar with the ABA categories, that is a must. You have a review of it and make sure you are aware. There'll be some documentation to say the typical course duration and a conversion calculation list. And finally, there will be an example of the correct certification. So you can compare that to what you're using and make sure that it is up to standard, really. So thanks for listening. I'll now hand back to Adam. you.